Afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Becky Perkins. I'm the Survivor Support Specialist with Zero Abuse Project, and we're very happy that you've joined us today for our Learn and Ask SurvivorCircle session. I'm very happy to welcome back Sarah Helms, a clinical psychologist and SurvivorSpace subject matter expert, who's going to talk to us today about some terminology that we use when we're talking about surviving childhood trauma. So really excited about Sarah's presentation. Just a couple of housekeeping things for folks who are joining us. If you want to see a larger screen of Sarah's presentation, you should be able to click on the box where you're seeing the video. You can make it go to a full screen. When Sarah's presentation is over, we'll be kind of going through a discussion. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you want to share anything, feel free to type those into the chat box on the SurvivorSpace page, and we'll be happy to respond, to answer, to discuss any of this great topic today with you. So with that said, we are going to go ahead and get started. And Sarah, it's all yours.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Helms. I am going to be talking for a bit today about what we mean by the terms that we use in the website and in this field of work around the terms of survivor, childhood sexual abuse. There's going to be some other terms we kind of walk through together today. As I think Becky mentioned, we're sort of getting all of this up and running. It's a little bit new for us. So I'm going to just let everyone know we're trying something a little new today with the technology, where I'm going to attempt to view the comments that are coming in real time. But that means I have multiple windows open and a lot going on my tech side, and I'm not a tech person. So maybe Becky, if you're hearing like dinging or if things are not working right because of me having that new window open today, just give me a shout out either on the screen or type a message in there, and I'm just going to exit out of that if needed. But hopefully that will all work. So again, welcome and thanks for being here. Just briefly, I have this funding acknowledgement to let everyone know that I'm a contractor. I'm working with SurvivorSpace, which is part of the Zero Abuse Project, and they have some grant funding that's described here through the Department of Justice. So today's talk is going to be a lot about terminology and really to boil it down, why we use it, why it matters. If you take nothing else away from today, my biggest point and take home, I think, would be that language matters. Language matters a lot in a lot of areas of work, but especially in this area because language shapes our perceptions. It shapes the way that we think about ourselves. It shapes the way that we think about others. And so when we're talking about childhood sexual abuse, words and language can really be empowering or really disempowering. People can feel victimized or re-victimized by the way that they are treated by other people around word choices and around language in a way that sometimes is unintentional, but sometimes is very much intentional. And a core part of some pieces of this type of abuse really are about people intentionally weaponizing language and the way that then impacts survivors. So we're going to be talking about all of that today. Because of that, I do want to just acknowledge that it's going to potentially impact all of us differently today during this session. We're going to be using words and language about some sensitive topics. So if you find that certain word choices or certain topics that are being discussed today are impacting you, it may be that one word or topic impacts one person and not another, or vice versa, or it may impact people differently in different ways. I would just invite you to kind of pause, take care of yourself, do what you need to do around that, and also to just be intentional about how you may choose to use language or how you respond in that moment. We're also going to be having the live chat going. So it may be that people have different opinions about some of these words, and that's okay. We welcome that kind of discussion. But just remembering that we want to be intentional about not weaponizing words or not using them in ways that hurt other people. So with that being said, with this core idea that language matters and is important, we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean. So childhood sexual abuse, fundamentally, I just want to stop and say children cannot consent, period, the end. This is so core and so fundamental to the definitions that we're going to discuss, to the concepts and the ways that this impacts us. Children cannot consent. So you may have family or friends or loved ones who have had experiences where they were maybe told different things about their experiences, maybe intentionally lied to about their role in it, or made to feel like something was their fault, or that they asked for something or wanted something. That's not part of this space. Children cannot consent. So anything that has been done or could be done to someone in this capacity is not a child's fault. Children cannot consent. Because of that idea that children cannot give consent for this, there are lots of ways that abusers may trick or force or manipulate. They may coerce children. They may intimidate or bribe. They may distort the facts. They may threaten people, right? All of these are ways that abusers can use language or messaging or implicit ideas that they can kind of build a climate or a culture where they can abuse. So fundamentally, childhood sexual abuse is anything that is done by an abuser for the benefit of the abuser, regardless of anything about a child who, again, cannot consent. So all of these different tactics around, being tricked or forced or all of these types of ways that abusers can do what they do. A lot of this does end up coming around to language, the ways that they talk about things, the way that they operate in secrecy, the way that language that they choose to use, or the way that they choose to present that language with a certain tone, all of that really fundamentally becomes part of the way that they abuse. So that's a reason why language matters, right? And why understanding these terms and thinking about language is important. So childhood sexual abuse can take a lot of different forms. One form would be visual content. So anything that is seen by a child or that is shown visually of a child. This could be things that a child was forced or tricked into creating, pictures, video, any type of visual content that others then consume. It could be visual content that is shown to a child. So a child seeing images or videos or live in-person things that they should not have been shown. As we talk about language and ways that children may be tricked or duped or told certain things intentionally in order to be made to feel a way about this stuff. Often abusers will claim that something was accidental. Oh, I didn't mean for them to see that. Oh, they accidentally walked into this room and saw this thing, when we know in reality that an abuser may have created that intentional misperception. But here again, an abuser using that language to their benefit. So all of those would be examples that fall under this definition of childhood sexual abuse. None of which involves necessarily physical contact. Things that some people would say, well, I didn't even realize that was part of the sexual abuse, was this abuser showing this content, or I accidentally stumbled on this content. I wasn't supposed to see it, when perhaps that wasn't necessarily true. Maybe that was a misrepresentation by an abuser to create the perception that maybe what was going on wasn't abuse when it really was. Childhood sexual abuse can also pertain to verbal content. So anything that is said or anything that is heard. And again, this could be in person, on a screen, through technology, through any method. That verbal content, sometimes, again, we're talking about language and word choices here. Some of that can be suggestive. Maybe it's not direct words, but something that had a double meaning, or that's twisted or kind of double-edged. Maybe there are topics of conversation that are very suggestive or have a lot of innuendo, where comments can then later be sort of played off. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Oh, they're just a child. They didn't understand. They took it the wrong way. So very intentional ways that abusers can choose to use verbal content to chip away at the safety and security of their child victims. Clearly, touch can be a component of childhood sexual abuse. So anything involving touching of oneself or touching of others. Often these are the types of activities that people think of when they think about childhood sexual abuse because of the physical touch component of sexual touch. But these are clearly not the only types of sexual abuse that occur. So it may be that an abuser has components of this and other components, visual, verbal, other modalities that we're talking about that are all blended together. Some of those things can also make it very confusing for a child to know or to fully understand all the aspects of what's going on because it can be very blended or overlapped. And then when we talk about grooming, so grooming really is the entire process through which abusers are able to coerce, force, manipulate, gain access to their child victims. And so survivors of childhood sexual abuse may be familiar with many of these. Some of these may have been used against you. Some of these maybe that you haven't experienced, or maybe that you haven't even thought of through the lens of, oh, that was part of that abuser's process. I didn't even connect that they were doing that. So the entire process of selecting and gaining access to children, the process of isolating them away from safe adults who might be in a role of protection over them, the entire process of building trust, where a child will begin to trust the abuser. And that can be a long, slow process with many steps involved. The process of keeping secrets, of training children to keep those secrets, often about small things first or inconsequential topics to work up to larger or bigger or more damaging topics. Systematically desensitizing people. So very intentionally as an abuser, thinking through what are the steps that I'm going to use. Maybe we're going to accidentally talk about a topic or expose visually to a topic and then work our way up to bigger or more threatening words, concepts, touch. All of those steps are all part of the sexual abuse. It's not just that ultimate, final step in the process. It's every step along the way that is part of that grooming process. All of that is part of childhood sexual abuse. So throughout SurvivorSpace, when we're talking about childhood sexual abuse, all of these different pieces of eroding those boundaries, sort of making people think, oh, this is normal. This is just normal stuff. The normalizing of the secret keeping or the building trust, all of those pieces go into grooming, and all of those parts are also part of childhood sexual abuse on a bigger scale. So on SurvivorSpace and throughout all of the talks, the written content, the video content that we are putting out as a team, we use the terms survivor and abuser. We use those terms because, again, we think that language matters and we want to be consistent, and we want to make sure that we are using broad terms that feel safe to as many people as possible. There are also lots of other terms that other people may prefer, and that's fine too. So some people will say, I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse. That is absolutely accurate. Some people prefer to say that they are a survivor. Some people say I'm thriving instead of surviving. So there's lots of word choices. Some people may use different language depending on the setting they're in. So often in legal settings, for example, the terms victim and perpetrator or victim and offender might be used more commonly than abuser. Just because of the legal setting and kind of the technical terms that people use there. Some people choose to use other words to really define the specific activities or the specific behaviors or the specific types of abuse. So someone might say, well, I was a survivor of human trafficking, so I refer to that abuser as my trafficker, rather than referring to them as my abuser. So lots of different pieces here, just in terms of what feels most empowering to you, what you feel like best captures what your experience was, and what you want to use to describe what that was, and what feels safe and comfortable for you. There are lots of statistics out there. RAIN is actually an amazing website, an organization that has a lot of valuable stuff out there. So if anyone is interested in hopping over to their website after the talk, they've got lots more good stuff out there. I borrowed a couple infographics from them. Every 9 minutes, a Child Protective Services substantiates or finds evidence for a claim of sexual abuse. So when we say every 9 minutes, that's not saying every 9 minutes an act of child abuse occurs. We know that there are so many acts of childhood abuse that are never reported. And of the ones that are reported, there are many that never make it through to the process from being reported to being investigated. And then of the ones that Child Protective Services investigates, many of them are unfortunately never substantiated, or there's not enough evidence for those organizations to sort of put an official label on them of saying this has been a substantiated claim. So what this says is that this is a massive problem. There are so many people out there experiencing this every day and living with the effects of it after it has been done every 9 minutes. What we also know is that overwhelmingly, child victims know the perpetrator on some level. 7% may be strangers, and those absolutely occur and are real. But so often, 93% of child victims knew that perpetrator, whether they were an acquaintance, a family member, a family friend, a coach. There are so many different roles that adults find themselves in with children that they are able to abuse. So with the combination of those two statistics of thinking of how frequently this occurs and how often that abuser is a person in that child's life that is known and that has a role in their life, what we know to be true then is that abusers as a label, they often are protected because they have different labels, real life labels, right? These are aunts, uncles, coaches, friends, neighbors. These are people who are walking through life, navigating life with a buffer of protection, because their real labels out there in the world don't look scary. Oh, that's Uncle so-and-so. Oh, that's Mr. John down the street. They have protection. They are viewed as being safe and trusted, as having some level of validity, and that they can kind of navigate life with this safety net around them because of these labels, because of how they are labeled. They aren't walking around with signs that say abuser. They're walking around with lots of different labels. This can give them protection, and it can also be confusing for children and for survivors and for adults who are looking back on that process. It can set up systems where people may not even realize that parts and pieces of what happened to them were abuse. As we were talking about earlier, many steps of that grooming process, many steps of the ways that abusers operate may kind of go under the radar, may not be picked up, or may be intentionally weaponized with how abusers talk about those things in order to intentionally create systems where they have protection around them to continue what they're doing. So it can be very confusing for survivors, and survivors can blame themselves often. The other piece of this language is that there's a lot of fear. So survivors may fear that they're going to be called a liar, right? Abusers get to walk around as, Coach Bill, but survivors don't want to risk making a claim that goes unsubstantiated, and that then they're told that they're a liar, that they made it up. And that's unfortunately something that holds a lot of people back from speaking on their experience. Abusers may try to twist or distort the situation. Oh, they're just a child. They're so foolish. They didn't understand. They just misunderstood. So survivors may hesitate to come forward because of fears of how they're going to be labeled. They may worry that they're going to be slurs about their sexuality. They may worry that they're going to be labeled. For survivors of human trafficking, often we saw up until very recently, many states and news outlets and legal systems still referred to children as being child prostitutes, when in fact children cannot consent to even consensual sex, let alone to sex for money or in exchange for housing or food. So what we see is that these terms, and especially when these terms are used by trusted organizations, by people who should be in helping professions, they can really be weaponized and contribute to survivors not feeling safe to come forward because of fears about the language of what they're going to be called. So I have a variety of discussion topics here, and we can talk through as many of these as people would like to, and I can also take questions about some of this content. But I would like to start with the first question on the discussion topics first, to just check in with people who are here today to ask, how does the term survivor and how does the term abuser feel to you? Do people have reactions to those terms that you have been using, or those terms that feel new to you? But just what is your reaction to survivor and abuser as terms? For myself, I feel comfortable with those terms because they feel empowering and they feel accurate. I will sometimes say the term victim instead of survivor, depending on the context of what I'm talking about, personally or professionally in different settings. But often I find that the term survivor feels more accurate, as so many people have moved through stages of healing and gotten to places where they feel that although they were victimized, they no longer walk through life carrying that term of feeling like a victim. They feel like they have survived, grown, moved through those victimization experiences into a space of a new community, a space where there are survivors out there gathering, just like on the Survivor circles and other aspects of the SurvivorSpace website, of kind of coming together. So yeah, always add survivor because that's sort of how people are identifying, seeing this comment now. And so yeah, so that healing journey, that absolutely. So it sounds like one of our folks joining today kind of resonates with that idea too, that perhaps early on in the process, it does feel like there was a space of victimization, and then it feels like moving into being a survivor through that healing space. So I love that. Just kind of checking in on another comment here. The term victim as being during a time when someone else is in control, and then survivor when you regain control. Absolutely. I love that explanation too, because that is, again, going back to that core idea at the beginning of my talk, saying like language matters. This can be empowering or disempowering. And so how we choose to describe certain situations can, the sense of feeling like I am regaining my control over this because I am viewing this in a different way. I'm using my language in a different way. That's so powerful. Yes, thank you to those of you who are kind of chiming in on that discussion. I feel like those are both really, really key points. For folks who are joining today, or for myself, we can also kind of talk through some of these other discussion topics and thinking about maybe beyond just these terms, just the ways that labels can impact the way people see themselves. Again, going back to that idea of how language is used, it can be kind of empowering or disempowering to yourself or to other people who you may care about. So I'll open up the discussion on some of these other topics. They're kind of overlapping, right, around how language can be empowering or disempowering, how you can be intentional about your own language when you're referring to other people, and ways that you hope that that might be empowering to others. And really, my last discussion topic up here, if we want to also kind of delve into that, is just this bigger idea of why does language matter? Why do people see this as being important, specifically in the area of childhood sexual abuse, but certainly in others as well? So with those discussion topics up, I'll just kind of hit pause and see if anyone joining today has any discussion or just anything on their heart that they want to kind of weigh in about this idea about how language matters, how terms are important, and how words can be empowering or disempowering or just matter in general.
Hey, Sarah, while folks are having the chance to gather their thoughts and hopefully type some discussion ideas in the chat, I wanted to bring up a survivor recently had shared with me that they actually don't like the term survivor because survivor to them feels like they're in survival mode, right? That they're just kind of like trying to get through the day. They kind of prefer the term thriver because they're in a place now where they feel healthy. They feel like they're, sort of in control of their life, and that to them feels, like a more accurate way of describing where they're at in their process as compared to survivor. Not that either one is, right or wrong. It's all, of course, individual. But I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is one of the spaces where as a therapist, obviously I like to check in with folks and just talk about what language or what word choices do you prefer? What feels right for you in the space that you're in with your healing journey? And people have different opinions and are in different spaces about that. Often I think also sometimes people will flip around and use different words depending on the context of what they're saying, right? So if they're talking about things that happened in the past, they might say, I was a victim of blah, blah, blah back when it happened. Today, I see myself as a thriver because I have moved through this process. So, it may be that depending on what they're talking about and their comfort level, they may use multiple words to describe kind of where they have been, where they are, where they hope to be going, all of that. Absolutely. I will leave the discussion topics up and then also just open up the floor. If anyone has general questions about any of the content that I shared today, I'm happy to take general questions about anything or other discussion points that you may have been reflecting on your own and topics that you might want to share or discuss about this idea of language, using the terms like survivor, using terms like childhood sexual abuse, or other terms that may be relevant for this process. So any questions or comments that people would like to chime in with? Also open to any feedback, which I probably should have mentioned at the beginning as well. For anyone joining today who would like to join again, we're doing this same topic on Thursday, same time, just to offer kind of different options for people's schedules. So if anyone who was joining today is having any reactions to any of this content or any thoughts about, hey, this would be an important way to extend this conversation, or, in a future session, it might be helpful to talk about this topic as well. Would love to hear any feedback about today's talk. Might be able to incorporate by Thursday, or any bigger kind of feedback about what we're doing at SurvivorSpace, what these Survivor circles could look like, or just any feedback from you guys who are here today to help us grow and make this project bigger and better. Thank you. Appreciate the feedback. Someone saying that it has been wonderful. Thank you.
Sarah, do you feel like the media, different ways that folks outside of victim services talk about these issues, do you feel like that is getting more sort of trauma informed as time goes on? I mean, sometimes I feel like news articles still occasionally use terminology that makes me cringe, like, this offender had sex with a child. Like, that terminology is, a little not so trauma informed. But do you feel like in general society is getting better at the way things are phrased, or is it, kind of on an individual basis?
I think that on average we are getting better, but there are absolutely so many instances, especially in the media. The example you just gave is a prime one, where I will read news articles. And I think that's why actually early on in my slide deck, one of the first things I said, right, children cannot consent. Like, let's just stop here, because this is it sounds so simple, but it's so fundamental to where we go off track so quickly with this. So, you may see, or not just in the media, you may hear this, on social media or in personal conversations you're having, people talking about, especially teenagers, who are having sex with older boyfriends, or whatever the ways that these are kind of portrayed, right? A lot of times I also see this as being gender-based. So you may see that a male adolescent victim is viewed through a different lens than a female adolescent victim. When you think about examples of, adolescent boys having sex with a teacher or a sports coach, again, children cannot consent. So fundamentally, we need to be careful and be sure that when we're using that language, that we're not perpetuating some of these stereotypes and misperceptions that enable abusers to continue doing what they're doing. When abusers are able to slide under the radar with, oh yeah, we were just having sex, right? Like, that children cannot consent. I have to go back to that slide. So I think we do see some improvement in some of that language, but absolutely it is still a core to where survivors, victims, end up not sometimes not even knowing that what happened to them was abuse, because we don't talk about it in that way. We use all these weird, language around it that's not accurate.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? You're in this field so deeply as well. Do you see that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of see it the same as you do. I was thinking as well just about, the language that an individual survivor may prefer to use when they're talking about their own experience, is that we're, in this space in society now where we're endeavoring to be generally more inclusive of people with different identities, right? So like with gender identity, we're asking for people to, say what their preferred pronouns are. That's one example. So, I think that kind of drives home the point sometimes is, we can give people sort of the sense of ownership over how they would like to be referred, how they would like their experience to be, referred to. So, we may ask someone, what is your preferred pronoun, in the same way if we're talking with them about their experience with past trauma. We can say, how do you like to, describe yourself, or, survivor or thriver? What do you, what do you think of yourself as? I mean, it's a way, for people to be able to label themselves if they want to, instead of us doing it for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think also through the healing journey, obviously as a therapist, I see folks who are in all different stages, from very recently experiencing trauma to maybe only very recently discussing a trauma that was from a long time ago, to people who have been, doing work for years or decades and are obviously in a different space with their healing. But even with talking about specific pieces of their trauma story, some people may feel more comfortable being very direct and saying, when this person did X behavior to me, right? Versus kind of saying like, well, when that stuff happened, or kind of talking in more vague terms, because even just saying some of the words can be difficult and re-traumatizing and threatening. So some people have to actually work up to the point of using certain words about what their specific experiences were.
Yeah. Yep.
So I appreciate everyone being here today. I also I appreciate all the different ways that people have participated, some with adding comments, some with being more internal processors and kind of doing that work on their own. But all of those ways are great ways to be consumers of a talk like this. So I wanted to just acknowledge that and say that although we presented some discussion topics, even just being present also is a really helpful way to navigate through some of this content. So thank you for being here. I certainly don't want to linger or force folks to talk more than what they are interested in, but I'm happy to leave whatever space folks need, but also happy to kind of wrap up a little early if we feel like this is not a day for a lot of discussion.
And we'll also leave the chat up on the page on SurvivorSpace. So if you want to continue the conversation after the presentation is over, you are welcome to do that. Like Sarah said, sometimes we need some time to process things before we can kind of chime in with a question or a thought. So feel free to chime into the chat after the presentation is over. And as Sarah mentioned, this presentation will be repeated. It will be live again, but the same topic on Thursday at noon Eastern. So feel free to join us again if you would like to. Our next topic after Thursday will be on May 31st, and the topic will be understanding talk therapy. Excuse me, the different types of therapies that are available to survivors of trauma. So again, Sarah will be back with us on Thursday, and then our next topic after that will be on May 31st. So thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.